have the first portrait I ever did of you. Remember this one?
Oh God, no, I don't remember. When you were a child.
1956.
Is that right?
Here it is, by Judy.
Oh my God. My mother.
My mother.
I had a big mouth then too.
My name's Cameron Cartiere, and I'm the curator at the Falkirk Cultural Center. And we're here today talking with artist Judith Selby about her installation First Face, which is currently up at Falkirk. Judith, why don't we start with you telling us, take us visually through the piece. How would you describe it?
Okay, thank you, Cameron. It's a delight to be here, and it's really an honor to be exhibiting at Falkirk. Falkirk is a very special place, and I felt like it would be the perfect container for this exhibition, in that it's a home, it has a domestic quality to it, and because my exhibition First Face is about my mother, it felt like the right space. And coupled with the multi-levelness of that space. The exhibition begins at the base of the servants' stairs, and as the viewer moves up through the space, they are encountering images of an art historical nature, all of my mother in portraiture, beginning with Impressionism, Cubism, Constructivism, and so on, until you reach the landing area. And in that area, I feel like going up the stairs is like the past, the art history. And then you reach the area of the landing, and that's what I consider to be the contemporary search for identity. In that section, I did psychological profiles, I got her medical reports, I did an Andy Warhol version, all kind of our present day. And then there's a small flight of stairs that go up into the attic, and that's somewhat my projection into the future. I did some computer manipulations and tried to see where we might be going with portraiture and what images we might have within that genre.
Now, why did you decide on the portrait for this particular project, since right now in contemporary art history, portraiture is not really at the forefront of what's going on in the art world right now? How did you choose that particular venue?
Well, portraiture has always been at the core of my artistic expression. To me, the portrait is filled with great hope. It has to do with our human beingness, and to portrait someone is to give voice to their countenance as well as to their whole being. And I really feel that the genre of portraiture can be invigorated by these investigations. I term what I do portrait installation. And for that, I mean that it's not just about creating one image of a person, but an image over time. So for example, my mother and I in this project worked for almost 2 years, and we created a series of images, not one single image. In the past, I've done projects with other people that have also involved a period of time. For example, I did a project in about 1987 called Vinti with a young man who was diagnosed with AIDS. And I chronicled the last year of his life. And we met about once a week during that year. And the summation became the portrait installation, the various photographs, images, and text that I created for that. So this First Face, the portrait of my mother, is following that kind of investigation. That it's a creation of a series of images, and in this case I kept a journal and I did various recordings, many things that are not included in the exhibition due to the spatial constraints.
Tell us where the title came from.
First Face. Well, I love the idea that for most of us, our mother is our first face. That's how we come to know our basic emotions psychologically. It's a very complex relationship. We learn love and compassion and fear and tenderness and all of those things from this first face, which is our mother. So it seemed apt that that would be the title, since she is in fact my first face.
Now, this was a very interesting subject to choose, to work so intimately with your mother on a 2-year project. How did that work for you and her? How did your relationship develop around that?
Well, it was really important for us in terms of the relationship, in that prior to this embarking on such an extensive project, we had had a very tumultuous relationship, probably typical of most mother-daughter. I don't know if it's typical or not, but it seemed to me quite typical. We could bicker about everything. And it came to a point in both of our lives that we had, through a variety of circumstances, realized that life was rather short, and perhaps we could dismiss with this antagonistic relationship that we had and proceed in a new way. At that time, with that revelation, I decided to propose to her that we would use an art project, that we would use her portrait as the occasion for us to get together. And so we began, first innocently enough. We never had any idea it would turn into an installation or any kind of artwork, but we would get together and we would meet, and I would photograph her, I would sketch her, I would do tape recordings asking family history, just in kind of a documentary, wanting to get to know her better sort of way. And then over time it sort of snowballed, and we both really had energy about it. We could see this is developing into something. And so the project evolved into something really beyond ourselves. But it came out of a very difficult place in our relationship, and I'm happy to report that there was a tremendous healing, and we really became to really like one another.
Now, there's also set up at Falkirk a grid of portraits. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the installation.
Okay, that piece is called Sketch a Day. And I wanted to do something in process. I'm also interested, again, about time. So I took one of the photographs that I had taken of my mother, which I call the image from the German Ursprung. The image was one of the images that I decided that I would work with repeatedly. So I set the photograph up, and I sat then every day in the same chair, using the same kind of paper, the same pencil, and I did a sketch of her as if she were sitting modeling for me, which was not possible. But I did that every day for 30 days, sat in the same relationship. And what I didn't know what would happen when I began. I just thought that they would end up being the same every day, that I would just make a drawing and it would look like the next day, the next day. But what I discovered was the energy that I brought to that process each day greatly impacted the result. Some days I didn't feel like doing it at all. Some days it was a wonderful thing to do. Some days I felt very meditative. Some days I was anxious. And I think it's apparent in the images what's going on there.
Now, there's a little visitor interactive section to that. Tell us about that part.
Okay, well, I'm somewhat of I guess I'm a scientist as well. And I also want people to engage or interact with the whole idea of the portrait. So I created a questionnaire where I asked the viewer, the person that's coming to the exhibition, what their opinion is. Which one did they like the best? Which one did they feel was the most artistic? And I have them on this grid. They're numbered, so the person looks at the image and then they're to put a number. And then I ask them to describe what they saw in the. Give me some descriptive words about that person. And I did it just because I was curious. I wanted to see what does it communicate, and also to get people to slow down and to really begin to question for themselves, what does portraiture do and what can it tell us about that person, and then what can it tell us about who the artist is.
Now, you've also done a video that goes with this piece called Moments. Tell us a little bit about the video, and in watching that video and your and your mother's interaction, it seemed an incredible amount of fun too while putting this together. Right. How was that?
Well, I must say my mother is a real ham and just very able to go through the rigors of this. I really put her through the paces. For example, one of the more difficult, the Moments is a series of short videos, 30 seconds, 1 minute, exploring a variety of topics. But one of the more adventuresome ones was one called Matrophobia. And matrophobia is a piece that about something that I have experienced. Matrophobia is a term meaning the fear of becoming like one's mother. And I don't know how many women have that experience, but I certainly have experienced that. And so I wanted to talk about that directly. So in the piece, there is a voiceover saying matrophobia is the fear of looking like one's mother. And then comes onto the screen, my mother and I, both wearing duplicate masks of my mother's face. So in fact, in the video, I had become exactly like my mother. And I think to confront that and to make fun of it allowed me to really separate myself and to say, hey, I am like my mother, I look like my mother, but in fact, I have become my own person.
Now, what's your mother's response to this whole project now that it's done? And I know that she hasn't had a chance to come and see it yet, but she does know the elements and what's going on. What's her overall response to the end product?
Well, unfortunately, she's in really ill health right now, so she hasn't been able to come. But all the way along throughout the entire project, as I completed each section of the work, I would bring it to her and we would talk about it, and I would basically get her approval. If it was something that she objected to, or certainly in the psychological questionnaires, I asked her a lot of probing and personal questions, and I wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable disclosing everything to a public, to kind of lay herself open for that. And all the way along, she was really a great sport. She feels a little funny in that here is her face laid out, and people are coming to look at it. And although she claims to be an extrovert, she's also very shy. I mean, you can imagine having your face and having everyone come to evaluate it. But at any rate, she is very supportive of the project.
Now, you've also developed an educational component for this, for school groups and for children. Why? First of all, why did you do that as an adjunct to this show? Because normally that may not be something that an artist would do. The project is done, it's up on the wall, and yet it seems like with everything you do, you push it just a little bit more. How did this come out for you to do this little component?
Well, I think it comes out of my life as a teacher, that I always have a didactic element to what I do, even though I try in my art to make it purely maybe symbolic or metaphoric. But I felt like this exhibition particularly had a lot to teach us about portraiture, certainly in the art historical section, to have children come and look at that and to be able to identify the various art historical styles, that they're clearly grounded in that, and they could say, I know that, that is a Cubist painting, and to be able to recognize that overlay on my mother's face. So that there's the art historical educational part. And then I would hope, by engaging children in the process of questioning what a portrait is, that it would invite them to do portraits of their own family members, not only in just the creation of the likeness, but begin to gather some family history, maybe to ask their parents what, where they came from, what their preferences are, how they identify themselves. So I wanted to open it up for more conversation than one might normally encounter when they go through an art exhibition.
Right. Now, this show is up concurrently with another exhibition, Domestic Landscapes, Invisible Lives of the Victorian Era. And how do you see your installation, First Face, connecting with this particular exhibition?
Well, I think it does on two levels. First of all, what I spoke about, Falkirk being a home. I really wanted this First exhibition to be in a space that felt comfortable, that felt home-like, because my mom is my mom, and I felt that it was appropriate in that space. So, and since the Domestic Landscapes exhibition is addressing Falkirk as a home, it made that tie-in. But then beyond that, the subtitle of the Domestic Landscape show is The Invisible Lives. And I feel in some sense my mother might be invisible if I had not documented her in this way. She's a normal person, she's a mom. In some sense, not anything necessarily extraordinary about her life, and could in many ways slip through the cracks. So I felt by taking this and singing her praises and making her important, that I was making her visible.
Now, you really pushed the definition of portraiture in this installation. Tell us some of the ways that you did that.
Well, I feel the portraiture is not just about making a likeness. As you could see in my section, the sketches, how problematic finding what a likeness is. And it was as more and more as I delved into making the portrait, it was as if I couldn't find her face, because it kept changing as I kept changing. So it became almost this incessant search for the idea of a likeness. Then I realized that was almost a futile thing, because a person operates on so many different levels. We are not just what we look like, We're not just our surface appearance, but we have a multitude of levels of descriptions of our character, how we exist in society, what our identity is. And so I began to explore those aspects of who she is. On the windows at Falkirk, I have a series of labels on transparency material that describe some of the categories of who she is: Democrat, renter, single, mother, and so on. And I wanted, again, for people to consider what categories do they fall into.
Tell us some of the other ways that you identified your mother or captured your mother's portrait. I know that there's other elements and questionnaires and things like that. And how was that process? I mean, for you, was it playful? Was it a struggle to come up with new ideas? Or
Oh, at a certain point, it was just a flood of ideas. I began to see everywhere that where portraits are used in our daily lives. For example, these little unfortunate cards that we get in the mail listing missing children, for example. I made one of those cards using my mother's face and putting her defining weight, height, and so on. And I substituted her image for a child's image because I thought that's a way that we are kind of confronted with a portrait image in our daily life. There are many questionnaires that are